Well, another update on my reuse of Becker's circuit. So here we have the negative silver lead, the cathode, and hiding under my pillow is the positive silver lead, because it has the red wire. 6.6 gigaohms of resistance, one AA battery, around 200 picoamps theoretically, hypothetically, is the amperage, and just under 1.5 volts is the voltage, hypothetically. So, if the negative lead, the cathode, is placed over the navel chakra, the belly button, and the positive lead placed anywhere else, preferentially somewhere where we think we have an excess of energy, then what happens is this functions like Maharishi Patanjali's Sutra, in his book Yoga Sutras, the specific sutra having to do with the navel chakra, what he calls reduction, or I don't know if he says elimination, but reduction of appetite, desire for food. And, Patanjali is very terse in what he says. What I'm finding is this transfers energy, excess energy, because Charlie Lutz said that sometimes what we have are imbalance among the chakras. And the purpose of transcendental meditation is not to balance the chakras. So here we have a device that replicates Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, the Navel Chakra Yoga Sutra, the purpose of which is not to reduce the appetite. That's the benefit, or the result, the effect. But the cause of what this does is it improves performance of digestion. So let me back up and give you a little background why I think that is. In other words, reduction of appetite and improvement of the performance of digestion are inversely related, so that when digestion performance goes down, appetite goes up, because we're starving, because we're not getting the nutrients we ate just because we ate them, because we're not digesting and we're not absorbing them. So we end up hankering for more food. But if digestive efficiency goes up, desire goes down, because we're making more from less, as Maharishi Mahesh Yogi would like to say. Do less, accomplish more, making more from less. Now, the reason why I say this is a little tiny factoid from Francis Moore Lapp. Moore is M-O-O-R-E. Lapp is L-A-P-P, and I can't remember if there's an E at the end. Francis wrote a book called Diet for a Small Planet, and she might have done some others. And this was back in the 70s, and one of the little things in there, that was like my Bible for becoming a vegetarian. It really helped a lot. One of the things she said was, and I can't remember the figures, so you'll have to bear with me, it was either 40% or 60% of the food we eat gets absorbed. Once we digest and break it down, how much do we actually absorb? Not 100%. It's kind of like the efficiency of an internal combustion engine. It's only so efficient and no more. Well, what if that figure should go up? Then wouldn't we want less food? And what if we made things from that food that were not there in the first place? A kind of transmutation, shall we say. Then we've gone beyond 100%. Now we've got over unity. And that was covered by Louis Kervran, Kervran, a French guy. His book was translated into English, Biological Transmutations, another book from the 1970s. I think it was a yellow cover. Paperback, I believe. Yeah, they were both paperbacks. And he talked about how a robust, healthy individual, you can give him salt and water on a hot day, and he's outside working, digging ditches, something really vigorous activity. And you measure the salt coming off his sweat, and you measure the salt coming out of his urine, and it does not add up to the salt that you give him. And instead what you find is that he's putting out very little, or he's putting out less salt than what you give him, but he's putting out more potassium than what he could possibly be getting from where? You're just giving him salt. Is his body excreting or losing its potassium reserves? No, because the potassium level that he puts out is ridiculously high. It's more than any quantity of potassium that could possibly be stored in the physiology at any one point in time. In other words, the only thing left remaining that you can possibly guess estimate as to what's happening, hypothetically, not knowing any better, is that his physiology is converting that salt into potassium and excreting that. And then we can further infer, and this is what he did, he inferred that that transmutation is endothermic, helping the body stay cool by converting sodium to potassium, by way of adding oxygen. That's why he needed fresh air and sunshine and work and be robustly healthy, so that all his enzymatic pathways have no blockages whatsoever. He's a fully robust, functioning physiology. Then you give him some work to do out in the fresh air and sunshine and salt and water, and he converts the sodium to potassium because he takes the oxygen from his in-breath, attaches it to the sodium, and if you do the math, when you add the atomic number of sodium plus the atomic number of oxygen, you get the atomic number of potassium. So what's potassium's atomic number? I think it's 39. Oxygen is 16. Oh, I'm sorry, it's the neutron plus the proton count? Now I forget. I think it's the atomic number. Anyway, oxygen was 16 because I think it's actually 8, now that I think of it. So that means it would be 2 oxygen atoms. That's right, oxygen is 8. I think nitrogen is 7 and carbon is 6, right. So it takes 2 oxygen atoms, 16, plus 1 sodium atom, 23. 16 and 23 is 39, and potassium is their atomic number 39. So this was Louis Kervran's hypothesis as to what healthy physiologies do. And he even discovered that something like a piece of fresh fruit, when you dehydrate it, it converts its fructose into sucrose, as well as changing its mineral composition. And they did experiments with sprouting seeds, triple distilled water and extremely clean sand in a terrarium so that nothing gets in and nothing gets out. And they sprouted the seeds. They did an analysis of half of the seeds. They sacrificed half the seeds and and they incinerated them to find out the ash content, the mineral content, when burned into ash. And they did the same thing with the finished sprouts. And they found out that the mineral composition had altered itself during the sprouting process. So these things happen, even they don't involve living organisms. It just happens. It's like spontaneous in some cases, while in others it's dependent on the physiology of the plant or the animal performing the transmutation. So these kinds of things come up when we think about Francis Moore Lapp and we think about a circuit. Why does it work? How does it work? So this is just all the background I'm giving you on my supposition as to how Yoga Patanjali's Sutra operates. Why does it reduce the appetite? Because it increases efficiency of digestion. Because it takes energy from one place of the physiology and puts it someplace else. When we apply Becker's circuit, suppressed amperage, moderate voltage, we're taking it from wherever we place the positive lead, and we put it wherever we put that energy, wherever we place the negative lead, because there's no current. It's just a dipole, a voltage dipole of 1.5 volts, which is slightly elevated from the body's voltage, which is somewhere in the vicinity of 150 millivolts. And of course the amperage of the body is nothing like the amperage of this circuit. The amperage of the body, I believe, if I can remember, is either microamps or milliamps. I think it's microamps. But this is down in picoamps. Pico. That's 1,000,000 times less. Somewhere in the vicinity. I think it's 100,000 to be more precise. But it's vastly different, vastly reduced. So it's having no impact whatsoever in terms of amperage. And yet it overrides the body's voltage slightly by a factor of 10 so that you can put the voltage any way you want it. The body is a voltage map, like a topographic map. And so by slightly overriding the body's voltage differences among its various parts, this is what Dr. Becker had mapped out, this is what Michael Levin, I believe his name is, had mapped out, and this is what, or is it Mark Levin? I think it's Michael. And this is what Leon Ernest Eman had mapped out in Cooperative Healing, and Dr. Robert O. Becker in his book, The Body Electric. So all these three individuals are aware that the body is a voltage map, a gradient map, in which your right hand and your left hand have different voltages. The tip of your nose and your belly button also have different voltages. And all these differences creates a topographic-like map of the voltage gradient of your body. And here we come in with a circuit and slightly override that in order to take energy from one place and move it to another. And this is something I never realized about this circuit because I never involved the navel chakra and the resulting appetite to realize what I was doing. I'm moving energy from one place and putting it someplace else. So if I have an imbalance in my physiology such that my digestion has been weak since birth, it's a congenital defect of mine, not only my digestion but my white blood cells as well, which are performing a similar function. They're just digesting pathogens outside the stomach, in the physiology itself, elsewhere, outside the stomach. But they're doing a similar job. They're the job of digestion. They're weakening pathogens and then they consume them. Foreign invaders, that's their job. So my digestion and my immunity has been weak since birth, and so I've always been sickly as a kid, hated it, and I had to become a vegetarian and study health to compensate. And it's gotten worse because of drinking polluted water from the Hawaiian streams back in 1979 for 6 weeks without sterilizing the water, thinking my 100% raw food diet would protect me. It did. But unbeknownst to me, I was inoculating myself with a tremendous amount of parasites and not getting sick. So in my ignorance, my ignorant stupidity, I was making matters worse in the long run. Because some of those parasites eat food, the food we eat, but some of those parasites are flesh eaters, and they eat us. And some, I bet, do both. So steadily I declined in my health. And then I had antifreeze poisoning 13 years ago, and that accelerated the process. Because the antifreeze mutates genes. It doesn't just create it's not just carcinogenic, it's mutagenic. It mutates the genes. And they don't function very well anymore. Like my pancreas, I have a hard time digesting starch. So here I have a methodology to replicate Patanjali's Yoga Sutra of reduction of appetite by way of causing the digestive efficiency to improve, which is what I've been... I never thought I could do that. I never even tried. I just restricted my diet, and lived with it. I never thought I could make improvements. But the reduction of appetite means I'm going to be less concerned about food, less anxious. It's very calming to have your digestive efficiency improve itself. It's because it's very reassuring. Because the nightmare I've had my whole life is less of a nightmare. Isn't that cool? Less of a worry. One less thing to worry about. Now, it's very weak, and it doesn't surprise me, because it's only 1.5 volts that's influencing the situation. And I don't think I would want more than that. So it takes hours of running this thing through my physiology for it to do anything noticeable, such as reduce bloat, an indication digestion is not occurring. and help flatten my tummy and reduce gas. Another indication that digestion is not very efficient. It takes hours. It's a very slow process. And you know what? Slow has been my motto ever since I was a kid. When I was a 5-year-old, I took forever to tie my shoelaces. And if you interrupted me, I had to start all over again from the beginning. So dare not interrupt me and try to rush me. I was very slow. Very methodical. Very thorough, but extremely slow. Everything I did was slow. Chewing food was slow. You know, I had tiny mouth, tiny teeth, 3 rows of teeth in my bottom jaw, 2 rows of teeth in my top jaw. My poor tongue was squashed in the middle. Anyway, because I was congenitally not fully developed. And had my father included raw fish in our raw food vegan diet, it would have been a perfect paleo diet. But they didn't know about that back in the 50s. They didn't know. He didn't know. All he knew was the hygienic way of life. And we suffered. We were alcoholics because he bought in bulk, stored it in the garage, and in the summer the fruit fermented. And my mother was more sick each winter than the last winter, and she miscarried before my pregnancy, and the only reason why she had me is because she got off the diet and started eating cooked food. That's the only reason I've been born. And we started to split up, and by the time I was 2, we had separated and left my father behind, and he died in a year's time. He couldn't handle the separation, I guess. It was probably psychosomatic that he died within 1 year. Probably was not taking care of himself because he was pretty ill when he died, which is not like him, because he was this was excruciating precision of dietary reform to be on a raw food vegan diet in the 50s of all things. But had he included raw fish, none of that would have ever happened. I would have been born. And my brother was a head shorter than his cousin, and there were only 3 weeks difference in age. Same weight, a head shorter. My brother was chubby. He looked like he was Asian, because he had, kind of slitty eyes. Well, because he was chubby. Anyway, and he was always breaking his bones, but that was his fault. He kept falling out of trees. It was his choice to fall out of trees. Had to climb them, and then he had to fall out of them. I guess he wanted the attention. He felt like he wasn't getting enough love, because probably he felt like he wasn't getting enough nutrition to compensate for the alcohol in our diet. And he probably was correct. And my father got away with it because he smoked a pipe. But my mother and my brother and myself, we suffered at the hands of our father, who was ignorant about what he was doing to his family. Because he had a stimulant. He was smoking tobacco. So he was able to compensate for the alcohol and the reduction of metabolism on a refined diet, because that's what a raw food vegan does. It refines the nervous system. It refines metabolism to make it more refined, and so things like smog become more painfully hurtful. I found this out when I was fasting on fruits and vegetables, following the same book that he followed, only I was more extreme than he was. And so I learned more in less time. Some things I didn't learn until now. Raw fish is not bad as a supplement, not as a food. And that's the way my grandparents on my mother's side dealt with meat in the old country. They had meat once a week, and only the parents, if they were lucky, the children never got it. They just had a lot of dairy and cereal grains and fruits and fish from the nearby stream. So they weren't vegetarians, but they did not eat meat because meat was a luxury. But fish they had in abundance, along with dairy and, probably eggs, too. They had a farm. So anyway, if they had included raw fish along with those raw fruits and vegetables, and raw nuts and seeds and avocados, and all the juice my mother made, the carrot grape juice combination blend, 50-50 blend, they would have surpassed everybody else in terms of health, because they had a paleo diet. My father had something against starch. There was something about starch he didn't like. I don't blame him, because I cannot digest starch ever since the antifreeze poisoning that I've been through. As a vegan, you depend on starch. I can't. So maybe he was a victim of antifreeze poisoning. Who knows? Or some kind of poisoning that shut down his pancreas. Who knows? Whatever it is, he had a thing against starch, and he had an allergy. He would get hives, and he didn't know what he was allergic to, and he got hives. So putting himself on the diet prevented hives. He was a macrobiotic. He ate only brown rice when he met my mother. Then he became more extreme and said, okay, now the whole family has to follow Arnold Ehret's diet, mucusless diet, and healing system in order to be with me. And so my mother was a devoted mother. She didn't work. He worked, and she stayed at home. And she prepared all the food, and she froze to death because they lived in an unheated bungalow. She had a little room heater she would pull from one room to the next as she went around the house doing her chores. I mean, they suffered. They suffered a lot. Amazing. Anyway, so I was born with defects that I never grew out of, but my brother grew out of his defects because he was conceived at a different point in the career of their marriage. So he was conceived very early on, and so he didn't get the congenital defects that I got, but I didn't get raised the way he was raised. So it was kind of an inverted situation. I did not get the restrictions he got, and so I got sick all the time because I was eating foods I couldn't handle because I had congenital defects hampering my ability to deal with a standard American diet once we left my father. But my brother, he wasn't born with those defects. He simply grew up developing them as a matter of course. So once we separated, he did fine. He grew out of all his shortcomings. He gained the height that he had not been growing as fast enough to keep pace with his cousin. And he grew out of his dental mess, too, because it wasn't as bad as mine. But me, I never grew out of it. So we had inverted situations between the two of us, my brother and myself. It was very interesting to analyze in hindsight. Anywho, so this circuit is interesting because it's changing the way I eat. It's changing the way I digest food. It's also impacting how I eat because it's making it less necessary for me to be frantic in keeping up my weight. I couldn't care less. So I may lose weight with this, and I wouldn't be surprised. That's the effect of the navel chakra sutra that Patanjali describes. Because he says it reduces your appetite. So if it reduces your appetite by way of increasing efficiency of digestion, the overall effect might be that you eat less calories. It could very well be the case. But you waste less as well. You suffer less. And so it doesn't necessarily mean you starve. That's not true, see. You don't starve. You simply eat less. And you make more out of it. But the net result might be that you do reduce your caloric intake, and so it could be that you do lose weight in the process. Because that's what you would infer. If it reduces your appetite, your desire for food, that you would lose weight. You would expect that. Sort of. I would. But I don't know. You may maintain the weight that you've got. I mean, because you're increasing efficiency. So I don't know. I'll have to find out. But having less toxins generated by the large intestine because there's less waste, less spillover of food that has gone not digested to serve as fodder for the pathogens in the gut, many of which in my case are the negative pathogens, the yeast and so forth, instead of the lactobacilli, means improved health right there. And a decelerated degeneration of the physiology, because all of the toxins, the hydrogen sulfide, the toxic byproducts of the decomposition of the food mass in the large intestine and the lower small intestine, if there's less of that around seeping into the bloodstream, then there's less degeneration going on. So I won't age so quickly, because that was one of the side effects of antifreeze poisoning, is an accelerated aging process. So now I'm 10 years older than my years. I'm biologically 10 years older than my chronological years. Instead of being 4 years or 5 years younger, which was the case before the antifreeze poisoning, so I've aged 15 years. I have more gray hair than my brother has, and he's 7 years older than me. It's really disgusting. So this circuit, now that I know how to use it, to actually help a condition, more than just reduction of pathogens in the body, because they don't like DC current, owing to the research of Colley and Lyman, as described under the heading of blood electrification at the website Educate Yourself, educate-yourself.org. It does more than just that. By using the knowledge of the chakras, we can move energy around and improve efficiency by putting energy where it's needed. Energy of the subtle bodies, energy in this case having to do with digestion, putting it at the solar plexus, where in my case I need it. And I talk too much as it is, right? You know, I talk. All these YouTube videos. Because I have a lot of energy in my throat chakra. So my grandmother wasn't lying when she said I talk too much and eat too little. Because I wasn't interested in eating. Because I wasn't going to digest my food anyway, so why bother eating? So I was never interested in food. I was more interested in talking more than anything else because I had a lot of things to say. I always do. Yada, yada, yada. Anyway. So, until we meet again. Well, slight error. The nabhi chakra, the navel center, is not cessation of hunger. That's the pit of the throat. That's the sutra immediately following the navel center sutra of Yoga Patanjali. So the navel centers, the sutra has to do with, it explains or describes in that third chapter that the navel center is the center of all the energy systems of the body. So by pouring excess energy to the center must help balance all of the other energy centers, because it's the nexus, the central points. So it's like a wheel. If you had a wheel spinning, a merry-go-round, and all the people were standing on one side, causing the merry-go-round to wobble as it spins, it's as if you took everybody's weight and put them at the center. And so now it doesn't wobble anymore. And that's what effectively putting a positive lead elsewhere and the negative lead of Becker's circuit over the belly button redistributes the weight from the periphery and takes it to the center of the energy systems of the body, and thus balances all of the energy centers. That's what it must represent. I don't know, just guessing.